Hello, Alberto, and welcome to the podcast. It is a pleasure to have you on. So, there's going to be plenty of people in the audience who don't know who Alberto Nuñez is, who don't know who Team 3DMJ are, and probably don't even know what natural bodybuilding is. So, I would like you to, if you would like to kind of indulge the listeners as to who exactly you are, how you got into lifting, what your background is, who you coach, all that kind of stuff, and we can take from there.
Okay. Man, so it's cool because I can say I've been lifting since the 90s. Um, it was like 99, so so just barely squeaked that in. Um, I think I probably had opportunities to lift before, but it was my father's thing, kind of. So you know how it goes. Like you don't want to do what the parents do. It's like you want to rebel. Um, So I was like, I got these sports. I don't need weights for like the sports I want to do. And I'd find just ways like out of it. Like my buddies would lift weights on a random Sunday, and I'm like, I'm out, like I want no part of this. And yeah, it wasn't until I tried it that I'm like, wow, this feels so intuitive and natural to me. Um, and like from there, you just get carried away like with it. You start buying the muscle magazines, you start changing certain components of your life, reprioritizing things a little bit to get more of this, to get better. You absolutely get to the point where you're overly complicating things because you've added so much that is, in some cases, contributing so little. But I mean, that's how it started. It's just getting to live with friends, like after school, it started as a little hobby. And then when sports were done, I'm like, well, I need something. And think at 19, you could say that I stopped kind of going back and forth between sports and this. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready to get on to full blast. And that's what I did. And by the time I wanted to do NPCT Nationals here, but I had missed out on that show. I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to go out in the open, I'm going to wait until I'm a grown man, basically. So I waited until I was 24, I think, the first time I got on stage. And yeah, I didn't know if I was going to like it. I think I liked the process more than the result because the result or the stage stuff, because to be quite honest, like everyone's first prep, it wasn't very good. But, learn from your mistakes. First prep to second prep, there's this like linear like spurt of progress that you make. And one thing led to another and started doing pretty well and found community in the form of the 3D Muscle Journey crew. Like we kind of just started because we were kind of doing the same circuit of shows, and California was so behind back then when it came to information. Um, Things just moved slower. So if you weren't like in the Midwest, certain spots in the East Coast, you were just doing things that like even for the enhanced guys like didn't work half the time. So that was our mission to just kind of improve the local scene, but people didn't talk internet back then, so it was funny. We had more Australians initially when we started the coaching service because those people are resourceful.
Funny.
They live in Ireland, like everything gets shipped in, right? So, you know, to them it was perfectly natural. Like I'm gonna get a coach. It's like thousands of miles away because that's the person I want. And yeah, just been doing this coaching thing since like I think formally 2008. But prior to that, you know how it goes. You start to be the guy in the gym that like knows a little more than other folks, and like you don't even realize you're like training to be a coach. Like you're building free programs for like this friend, that friend,
Mm.
and you're having a blast doing so. But started there that way. So I cut my teeth into coaching, and then some stuff like 2008, 2009. But 3D Muscle Journey didn't like fully take off till like 2011, and here we are, and it's what I do, and it's what I wake up for like every single day. So it's pretty cool.
And as you kind of got into coaching with 3DMJ, I suppose the rise of the internet and the form that we know it obviously played a big part in that. Would you have started off solely online, or did you do any kind of in-person coaching or PTing or anything before you started with 3DMJ?
I did some in-person PTing. I think I was 19, but it was just the wrong place. It was like one of those super commercial gyms where you're just looking to extract as much money as possible from every person who's like coming in the door. So that didn't really vibe with me. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go find something else. Bodybuilding won't be my career, because there was still like a glimmer of hope that I'm like, somehow, some way, I want to be able to do this for a living. Different times too.
Mhm.
Like even the high level IFBB pros, like if you weren't top 3 in the Olympia, you were doing like gay for pay on the side to pay the bills. So kind of a pipe dream in a way. So I'm like, I'm just gonna get a nice little career somewhere, keep things separate. But like, what did we do with our spare time when we were younger, right? It's like you're just out there scouring the internet, trying to get smarter when it comes to this, and that's all I did. Like that's all I did with my early 20s. So when the opportunity came up, and a lot of opportunity is timing, and right around the early 2010s, people were gravitating towards the internet. Smartphones were kind of coming to be a thing, and the whole remote coaching wasn't such a weird concept. Instead of being limited to the local talent, it's like, hey, I can find the coach that's like halfway across the world who's a perfect fit for me. Let's do the damn thing. But it was weird at first. A lot of folks, like, they didn't understand how I could be, I guess, an personal trainer of sorts, because that's all
Of
you really
course.
are when you're a online coach.
Yeah. And how is the online coaching process back then maybe compared to what we do it now? I suppose now we've all these lovely things like Loom and screencasts and even MyFitnessPal and that. What way were you working it back then?
Well, I think for starters, it sucked. Um, I think it was kind of like the gold rush where, you know, everyone was running to do it, but the skill level was quite low. And, there's still things that it's very easy for us to get caught up and be pessimistic when it comes to, you know, like what some people are doing with other folks who trust them a lot. They trust their coaches, and coaches aren't necessarily the best coaches sometimes, but the average
Mm.
competence like level has gone up so much over the last few years. Like it always makes me very happy to see like an 18, 19-year-old kid who it's like, dude, I didn't know what you knew till I was almost 30. Like
Yeah.
this is great. It wasn't all for nothing. So that's the first thing. But outside, like, honestly, not a whole lot has changed. We had YouTube, so we would just send videos back and forth with that. Excel sheets. If you did Excel sheets, it was like the equivalent of having like your own training app that's exactly how you want. Like, the
Yeah,
bros
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
mess with Excel sheets. But not a whole lot, because the people who knew that's what it took for them to potentially have a better chance of getting to their goals. They just needed the information, and however that was dispersed, like I could have taken a picture of like instructions on a piece of paper. They would have been happy with that at the time. So,
Of course.
so yeah. But the competency has gone up so much, like the last decade.
I think like very few people can remember like pre information overload days when you might have just been scanning forums for information. Like, geez, if I didn't fall upon like Matt Owis's YouTube videos back in the day, like I don't know what other kind of information rabbit hole I could have went down, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And even before that, like when I was in school, I think I actually remember I was programming for my Gaelic football team in fifth year, and they were following Ziz's 4-day training split. Because man, he was an athlete in my mind. So you know, I know you were very like popular on the likes of like the bodybuilding.com forums, and you were kind of there at the kind of like genesis of like flexible dieting, flexible approach to dieting, IFIM, and I think I've heard in podcasts before that like you at one point were very very broy, right?
Yeah, I was, but in some way, it's like hybrid in some ways. It's like sometimes you miss out on the big rocks because it's not sexy. Like, so for example, I didn't track a single calorie until I was like 8 years into lifting.
Mm.
I just kind of ate a certain way, and I was perfectly content with my lifestyle too. Like there was nothing that I felt I was missing out on, because hey, it seemed like the more I did this, the better the results I'd get in the gym. Like, I didn't necessarily miss pizza or going out on Friday nights like most people in their early 20s did. Um, so yeah, there were some hard spots for sure. Um, but I think that was my biggest realization was when I started to track things, because part of me is like, oh yeah, calories absolutely matter, and that's what I would recommend to general population folks. It's like, figure out what you're eating and try to be in a caloric deficit. And it wasn't until I did it that I'm like, oh wow, this stuff like really works. That and I saw the biggest change. That was what literally took me from a rookie bodybuilder that's like, oh, he looks good, but like he can stand to lose some weight, to the next year I got every pro card that was available to me. It was just like tracking my calories, and I would push the extremes of like what flexible dieting was back then, but mostly to like prove a point that like it's this important, it's that big of a rock. And back then people were just so just flabbergasted by this, because one, it's like, okay, he's drug free, and look, it was Stone Age stuff, man. Like they were kind of like, one of people would adjust things like, you know what, I'm gonna go from peanut butter to avocado. Let me see if that gets me through this plateau. Like, these were the tools they were using. So it was very cutting edge, and obviously it's going to work. Like we know now why it would work, but it got people very curious and thinking differently. And I think it's definitely improved the conditioning, just being respectful of like thermodynamics. Like over the last 10 years, like it used to be only some guys, like 1% of bodybuilders get like striated glutes, and I'd say that on average, like that number's probably, it's still not super common, but like you see it a whole lot more than like every other show you go to sometimes.
Yeah. I can see somebody looking at this retrospectively and going, so all I need to do is track my calories. So I can be like Alberto, I can go from not tracking to tracking, and I'll get my WNBF Pro card, INBA Pro card all in one year. I suppose it is true, though. I suppose it's retrospectively when we look at things like similarly in powerlifting training or in bodybuilding training or when it comes to nutrition, that when you look back, hindsight is, I suppose it's a lovely thing to have.
Yeah.
But for you, when you went from that kind of not tracking to tracking, and you were kind of starting to put out information at that point, what way did you kind of approach getting the good news out there?
I think people like folks who lead by example. That's why it's always so weird that you'll see a personal trainer that it's like, man, like you're just decaying year after year. Like you have a hard time holding yourself accountable and together. So I think it really helped that I walked the walk, because there were other folks who were trying to say this, but they weren't necessarily putting themselves out there. And I wouldn't have considered myself a first tier pro at the time, but close enough. It was all that people had. And back then, it's funny, as much as natural bodybuilders like want the spotlight, they want the attention, it's like they won't put themselves out there. So I was the only one doing it, and it kind of gave them a look into like what takes place inside the life of a natural pro bodybuilder, and that was unique at the time. So yeah, I think that was the main leverage, was the fact that it's like, I'm over here like walking the walk. It's clearly working. And we did a lot of good work, and not just myself, but like 3D Muscle Journey as a whole on those message board forums. It was the start of a lot of things, like the ripples in the water. Like to this day, I can still identify them like clearly as they happen today.
Yeah, it's wild. I think those forums, for anyone that's around myself and Shane's age, I think we were like the last babies. Shane, are you a year or 2 years older than me?
I'm 29, so 3 years.
Oh, yeah, 2 years older than me. But I was kind of the last age where I was on forums when I was like 16 or 17, going through stuff, and we were talking to Steve Denovi yesterday, and Steve was on about dog crap training, and I can nearly remember to the like what I was doing. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't sleep, and I was on this fucking shit brick of a Nokia where the touch screen, you nearly had to punch it to get some response out of it. And I came across like, the bodybuilding.com forums, and I was like, what? And like, it's the first time for a lot of people, I suppose, where they have to critically evaluate information, because at that time. And I think maybe it's a skill that I probably picked up for myself was, okay, so I'm being presented with all of these methods, and these guys are maybe explaining their reasoning for that method a little bit better. And I think for me personally, that was a skill I picked up quite young, and particularly with my own training as well. Well, these lads are saying just go in and annihilate yourself with as much as you can do, whereas these lads are saying try and do this amount, see what response you get, and then you'll test that over time. So I think it was a nice wave to have kind of caught the end of, was those forums, because a lot of that has kind of died out, and I think the nuance of text, and I suppose while a lot of information that people will get will be these short form reels of here's 5 ways to blow up your squat or whatever the fuck it is. But I think the text and you know what I mean. I think the text and the long form way of communication that those forums provided was invaluable.
Yeah, it's all we had, and it's crazy. It's like you would post something, and then maybe you get replies, or just maybe your own set of ideas. Like, you'd put them out there, and then you would leave the computer, go on with your life, and like think about it, and then come back. And it was, so it would move a lot slower. But I think you picked up on the really important things a lot faster, and it just gave you space and time to like ruminate in your own mind, like, is this something maybe I should try? Whereas like there's literally people who like they work out by scouring through I don't know, a push session that someone posted on TikTok or a reel, and it's like, this is what we're doing today. Like that's
Yeah.
legitimately how it's done. So it's a disadvantage in a way. I mean, it could be a big advantage because there's so much information out there, but it's always hidden. The good stuff, the juiciest stuff it's hard to find because, that's a skill. That's a skill, you know?
It is, yeah. Um, and how, I suppose, kind of, you said you're someone that started training in the 90s, so for a lot of people that could be listening to us, their date of birth could start with a 2. So for for you, kind of, has your training style kind of evolved, maybe from that 90s? I suppose, for anyone that doesn't know, I suppose the classical 90s bodybuilder, be they natty or enhanced, went into the gym, picked a body part, picked 7 or 8 exercises. So we'll do 2 to 6 sets for 8 to 20 reps across multiple sets. All of those would probably be done fairly close to failure, and then you train that body part a week later. So what kind of way were you training then versus, I suppose, maybe now, for anyone who doesn't know?
It just kind of like everyone else, like it was just all over the place. And I think for an early level intermediate, once you get to the point where it's not just about like showing up anymore and trying harder, because that works until it doesn't. It's probably a good time to explore and try things, and like even though my training, like biggest thing I could tell you is that it's compressed quite a bit compared to where it was. You get there by trying a lot of things, right? And I think we've all been there, like with these high volume routines where, I don't know, it's your 7th chest exercise, and you're like, man, I really don't. I think this guy's just in for the free ride. I don't think he's really contributing to the team. I think in my mind that like exercise 2 and 3 are probably my money makers here, But you
Yeah.
get there by exposing yourself to more. So I think early on when the joints are fresh, as you're still trying to figure out how to collect good information and figure out what's reasonable and unreasonable advice, it's not a bad idea to just go in there, expose yourself to a lot, even if it means like 40 set days or whatever. Young people are so incredibly hard to hurt. They have no idea. And usually they're pretty weak too. So it's like,
Yeah.
right? So you start that way, and then eventually you just start eliminating things and seeing what sticks. But yeah, like a lot of folks, I was going in through doorways by like kind of doing a circle and then going in. So of course, if you ask me how do you get in through doorways at the time, I'm like, oh, you spin once and then you go in through the door. And I'm sure that's how it works. It's worked. Like you don't know any better, and you're afraid to let go of the
Yeah.
spinning before you go through the door. But yeah, eventually, like now we've gotten it to the point where I don't know. it was a very diluted cocktail, and like now it's grain alcohol. It's like exactly what it is that we're after is
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So yeah, that's the biggest thing is just you just learn to eliminate things that aren't working for you. Some because it just historically it hasn't, and then other things because you find out that this makes absolutely no sense. So
That's one thing I've been thinking about recently as well. Is like in your early days, it's almost better to be like an overworker than like an underworker, right?
yeah,
Because like
Hmm.
when you are that young, you do have such a like a ceiling for recovery. You're probably eating like nonstop around you as well, um, and it's yeah, you have it's very unlikely that because of your strength potential, your strength level as well, you're probably getting like very hurt if you do get hurt. Whereas like the person who's underworking, they're never going to reach that sufficient dose to get the results they want. So that person is probably going to fall off way earlier because they're not getting that like reward for their efforts. Whereas the person who's overworking, they might feel a little bit more beat up, but they may be doing their like 40 set workout, but they're getting to the end of it pumped as fuck, and then at the end of the month they're looking a lot juicier. They might not necessarily know why they are looking juicier. Like I've been there before, like doing a chest workout, and you do like every chest press on a decline, flat, incline, then do flies in the exact same manner. Then you go into the machine and do the exact same movements again and again and again. And you don't necessarily know until you do, until you know, right? When you discover that information, to be like, maybe if I actually just cut that session in half, I could get the exact same result.
no, exactly, and it teaches you to work hard, man, which is one of those things that some people come in like out the packages like just dogs and grindy, but people have different temperaments, and for some folks, like maybe they didn't like sports growing up, and that was the first thing they've ever done where it's like they physically have worked hard, and that's how they unlock that side of themselves. So yeah, no, I'm when I mean I see it all the time at my gym. It's like all these like dudes in their early 20s. This is a college town that I live in, and I'm like, that's redundant. That's redundant. That's redundant. Like, but I'm like, but good for him because he's out here getting it. And eventually, no one's going to have to tell him. You'll pick up on that. If you stick around long enough and this matters to you that much, at some point you will.
Mm.
Yeah, I coach a lot of teenage powerlifters, and my favorite thing, it's not I won't say my favorite thing because some of them will be listening to this and say, Lawrence said, but I would way rather see them overshooting every week and being like, "Oh, felt good, load this fuck up," rather than someone telling me they're afraid to hurt themselves all the time. It's like they're 17. You could bang their head off against the wall and walk away from a car crash and survive a drop from a four-story building. You are indestructible. You should be running through walls. And like you said, like it's I suppose for some people it's the first hard thing they've ever done in their lives.
Mm.
And I think for me anyway, like not that I did never played sport to a very high level, but I think sports never came naturally to me. So if I was going to even play to a low level, I was going to have to at least try and apply myself. And then I found bodybuilding, and that was a much lower motor skill pattern than hurling or golf or rugby or anything. But yeah, like it's I suppose that's maybe a little bit of a segue maybe into what I wanted to talk to you about particularly, which was kind of you kind of, I suppose, coming full circle, that you've kind of gone back to your roots of nearly not tracking for your last prep. And I think for bodybuilding and powerlifting, there's subcultures of a gym, of like you've the gym culture, bodybuilding and powerlifting, which are subcultures themselves. And one thread that's very common between the two of them is that whatever doesn't get tracked doesn't get managed, or that you have to control the variables, control the controllables, or whatever online coaches are saying these days. But you've kind of, I suppose, maybe gotten a little bit against that dogma and against that rhetoric, and you're competing at the highest level within your sport, and you've been extremely successful in that domain. So can you maybe talk about your experience and maybe a little bit on how you kind of got to that point? Well, I suppose you've gone through how you got to that point, but maybe a little bit in your experience of doing that prep.
Yeah. Man, I've been in the deep end because like of tracking, because when you go from not tracking to tracking and you realize, your errors are more objective. It's like it made me realize, like, bro, I eat like 400 grams of protein a day and I don't realize it. My fat is like beyond triple digits by like 3 p.m. Things like that. You're able to see that. So the data is very valuable. But then it gets to the point where you go all the way on the other end. Like, I don't know, like you're trying to put in your last meal for the day and the app is down and like you are panicking. It's like you already know what you're going to eat. You know what you had. Just because it's not there doesn't mean like lose your mind over it.
Yeah,
Or, when you go from like, oh, you figure out that tracking is key, and you find yourself in social situations eating, and there's some anxiety because you are so used to knowing whether there is 21 grams of fat or 23 grams of fat in that dish, right? So like I've been there. Um, and I do think I've discussed this before, taking like many different nutritional courses, even if they're informal, is a good thing. Like exposing yourself to new things. Like, I don't know, like go try a ketogenic diet. Like go try a diet that is, I don't know, super restrictive. I'm not saying
yeah,
go do it, but like we've all done these things and we learn so
yeah,
much through them. So the same thing with like the macro class. I think it's an important course to take, but you don't want to be there forever because at the end you're kind of just retracing steps and plugging them in. It's just it gets weird, man. And sometimes um, it's one size doesn't fit all, right? You could have a slightly different day, and because of that, maybe you have to eat a little bit less or a little bit more. And I'm specifically talking within the confines of a contest prep. And so eventually it just dawned on me that it's like, man, I can self-guide myself through this a whole lot more. I kind of know what my breakfast tends to look like when I'm prepping, what it looks like at this body weight, how hungry I should feel, where my energy should be at. So, again, you're just retracing steps after you do this like long enough. Like I guarantee both of you gentlemen here can, I don't know, lose 5 kilos just like that without thinking. So all I
yeah,
kind of did is extended to that leg that I've done numerous times. I think when I tally it all up, I've probably had close to 3 years of my life where I've spent in single digit like body fat levels. So I I kind of know what that sort of living looks like. So it made it a lot more dynamic. It made it something that um, just how we make play calls in the gym, like no different. It's just like, let me make play calls here. And days where I felt like striking, I'll strike. Days where I don't. If my recovery is trash, I'll take that into consideration. Where am I like on the calendar? So it's like all these moving parts that it could definitely overwhelm someone who's not used to balancing all that. But to me, they're almost second nature, and they're not stressful at all to think about. So um, yeah, it just takes practice. It's terrain that a whole lot of people like haven't walked, I guess, like to get to single digits without necessarily tracking. But if you've done it enough times and you've rolled out the map every single time you go there, eventually it gets to the point where it's like, I don't need the map. Like I know which way to go. And if something's different, I know exactly what to do because I've been here before. So yeah, I think the tracking and all that is great ways to kind of establish objective ideas of what is taking place. But sometimes it can come at the cost of not listening to your body's like own feedback. Right? Just like because your spreadsheet says like, hey, this is what you're lifting for a 3x3 today. There's days where it's like, bro, that's not a good idea. You are gonna like
yeah,
break in three. So kind of the same concept. It's just that because it's nutrition, because it's such an around the clock thing, I think the concept of that freaks people out. But like I said, like those coaches now that are like 19, 20, I'm like, dude, you are a good coach, at least when it comes to the hard skills, like how these concepts work and how to apply them. Um, I think that in 10 years, you'll probably have a lot of kids that are tuning into things like this that don't even track. Like they've done all the things we've done before, and they're just there early, and that's how athletes keep getting better and better, because I do think it's the best way to get there. If you can auto-regulate things and like maintain your sanity and stay objective, it's
Yeah,
probably the best course.
I think that's, I think you said something there though, when we think back to, I suppose, the bodybuilders that we would kind of have spoken about maybe at the start of the call, where in the 70s and 80s it was like, well, I have a chicken breast for dinner and I have a potato and I have this amount of vegetables and I don't really need to track. I'm going to have that 4 times today and I'll have this before I go to bed. And I suppose we kind of laugh at it because everyone got now, but it kind of will come full circle to the point where that's just the way they lived their life. That was their lifestyle. And I suppose, like you, to the point where you identified that it was so ingrained within you, and being able to do a prep to get down in single digits is so ingrained within you that it it is truly your lifestyle, that it's to the point where you can regulate yourself and you're like, okay, well, I'm this far out, I should feel this hungry, I should look like this. These are the kinds of sensations, and you have that subjective anchoring within yourself that you've done. So, how many competitions have you done? How many preps have you done?
I think 5 preps, 20 something shows.
Fuck, right. So, like, yeah,
Yeah.
like, I mean, you're well seasoned within that, and you've so much bodily awareness that you've kind of gone back to the roots of it. I think that's, and it is kind of like what you said, or like what you said earlier, that macro counting is just a form of dietary control. It's not a lifestyle really that you're trying to live. It is an intervention. I think that's kind of where a lot of people do
Mm-hmm.
lose sight. And I like I've done unsuccessful bodybuilding preps, but um, like that, I would have been very diligent in what I was taking in. I would have been someone that would have tracked everything and checked every kilo that I lifted in the gym. And I suppose now for me, my lifestyle is I'm finishing PhD. I'm working 50 or 60 hours a week, but I know on nearly every day what I'm eating, what time I'm eating, and when I'm eating it. And I suppose it does kind of go to that loop. And it was something I was talking with my girlfriend about, where I was kind of saying, it was like, nothing's like, if I will track to maybe monitor my intake, being like, oh, I'm up a kilo or I'm down a kilo, but it's all stays within the baseline.
I definitely like I've definitely done a lot of diets over the years. Like last year was my first prep, and even because of all that experience I've built up over the years, like if I wanted tomorrow to go back to like my prep calories, I could, without even having to open up my fitness pal or macro factor or taking out the weighing scales, get back to my prep level of activity, because you build up the experience of it. You build up the awareness, like, of, that chicken thigh is going to be slightly different to like a chicken breast in regards to calories, right? And kind of making these kind of adjustments over time. I suppose that's like the biggest thing for the general population when it does come to tracking, right? It's like bringing things into awareness that they're not previously aware of. But as you get more experience, whether through dieting, through getting into something like bodybuilding, like a lot of these practices can become very intuitive. Like, I only track now out of the fact that I just like to put numbers on things, as opposed to it being something that I feel like if I don't do, I'm going to fall off the face of the earth. I think, like, even after prep finished last year with Brad, and he was like, "Do you want to start, like, stepping away from tracking?" And I was like, "Not really. Like, I enjoy doing it. It doesn't, like, affect me negatively. It's just I just enjoy putting numbers on these things." But I can absolutely see the kind of utility of doing it, and like, even with these my clients, I won't get them to track as diligently as maybe they did at the start, because you have to trust yourself at some point, right? The app is not going to be there. The weighing scales is not going to be there. Like, what are you going to do when it's gone? And definitely in the future, I'd love to get to the point where I trust myself enough to, like, go with a very kind of, let's say, uh, a non-numbers based approach to prep, right? Because it is stressful towards the end of prep, when you're going to get on stage and you have all of these seemingly moving parts, like, say, for example, peaking, and you're kind of maybe assessing your physique a little bit more. And one thing that can throw you off a little bit more then is like seeing numbers on an app, and almost that becoming a huge fixation of like your day to day. So it's yeah, man, it is super interesting that like you've been able to get there, but again, it's a process of years, right?
Yeah, yeah, and again, like a lot of this is just me being curious. Like you just at a certain point, like I wonder what would happen if I do this. Like part of me is still tempted to this next one, like run without tracking and without the body weight scale, and just go by pure appearance to see what that will get me. But I want that data because I want to know if like objectively I've put on more muscle. Um, so yeah, again, a lot of this is just you just get bored with things, man. Like you like I did a powerlifting meet once, like in combination with it was USAPO Nationals in 2014 here, just to see, just to test the skill craft, like to see if I could
Yeah.
run both. I would not recommend it to people. That was I did it, but participated more than competed.
Would it be something that you could see yourself going back to, Alberto?
Powerlifting?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. No, I mean, Um, I have more to contribute on this side, I feel. I love the sport. I'll stay up to like weird times to catch the sport. A lot of my friends are in the sport. Um, but I'll train powerlifters too. It's like I know how to get people strong. Like I'm I'm a decent powerlifting coach. Like I keep up with all the gadgets, the new wraps, like the equipment, like all that. Like I love looking at that, but for me, no, not necessarily. Like it's fun and it's nice to feel strong, but like yeah. No more dual athlete things.
No, no. I think that's very
One
fair.
one question I suppose I wanted to take us down through, or one topic to take us down through, is it's very common to hear people when they reach their 30s or their late 20s that is it too late for them to start the gym, or is it too late to make gains? Like, are we capped once we hit our 30s to just see our testosterone plummet and, become forever small? But I think, yourself, like Jeff, who's competing tomorrow, like, you know, user, you're 40, I believe, and then Jeff is like
Mm-hmm.
52. And like you've made substantial amount of progress in like the last like 10 years. I know there's a picture you put up on your Instagram not too long ago of like maybe 2014 over your back to like now. And like the progress has been huge. And that's been like in natural change, just been through trial and effort, hard work, consistency over a decade. So I suppose the
You
question
know,
is,
yeah. Are you completely broken if you start this late, right? Because some people, but it's funny, man. Like even like Eric started at I think Eric Helm started like at 20, and he's like, I wish I would have gone there earlier. And even for me, I'm like, man, I wish I would have started this like preteen and like the like the burst parts of like puberty, like with weight training. So everyone wishes like when a good idea, right? It's like I wish I would have started this good idea earlier, but nevertheless, it doesn't change the fact that it's a good idea and that you should do this. Um, and the older you do this, the more it just becomes a form of self-care, and it's one of like legit. I was thinking of this like walking to the store the other day. Was like, man, like uh this is right up there what I can do with and for my body with I don't know a guy that's like uh a multi-millionaire, because health is that important. And how'd I get here is because look, I've been doing this since I was like 16, like pretty hardcore. Like I said, I deviated from what most people in their early 20s do to do my thing. Um, so nevertheless, it doesn't change the fact that, hey, if you are 40 and you're starting today, it's like, it's not a bad idea to invest, like, and especially with this, I think with this, it's even one of those things where it's like, dude, if you're, I don't know, like 101 and it's like, realistically, we asked the big man, you got a year, bro. Like, let's make that last year like a little bit easier on you, there's just so many things that it does outside of like what are my like net returns. But back to what people want to hear, um Well, like first of all, like I don't consider myself 40 in some ways because like I don't. It's just it's at the point where because of what I've done, where it's like even when I start to decay, like let's just say it's 55, like okay, so now you're only as good as like when you were 25. Like that's a pretty square deal, to say that
Yeah.
like I'm 55 and I've downgraded to 25-year-old me. Um, but yeah, man, uh, it's and another thing, another tangent. So yesterday I put up something on like how TRT dads, this was on Threads on Instagram, like absolutely despise the SARMs goblins. And I'm like, I think a lot of that is just projection because that's still you in some way, because that's exactly who you would have been with what you know at that age. Because if we're being perfectly honest, a lot of folks who hop on TRT like they'd even give their body 2-3 years to like undo all the things that like you did for like decades when you weren't taking care of yourself. Like you spend your 20s your 30s like trashing yourself on the weekends, and like here you want it to fix itself up like in 3 weeks, and you want your hormone levels and energy and everything to be running smoothly. It's like that's not how it works, bro. So they see them and they see their impatience, their lack of patience, and how they want to be huge tomorrow. But it's like you are doing the exact same thing, just with slightly more developed frontal lobes and a slightly bigger budget, so you can actually get like the real stuff. Um, so it kind of works in both ways. You have the kind of the same thing, right? Like the teens, and then like the guys in like their 30s, 40s, and it's like it's too late. Like my body's wrecked. It's like we wouldn't be here as a species, like if our bodies were that fragile. Um, I mean, what happens in many cases when we diet people down to like contest prep levels of conditioning? It's like we almost neuter these folks. Like they are like they want nothing to do with their partners, right? In that way, anyways. And it regenerates back because we wouldn't be here as a species. Like the majority of our of human history was spent in less than ideal conditions, where it's like you were kind of like just hanging on for dear life, and uh, it's a big reason that we're here is because we're able to regenerate these things. So yeah. So for anyone older, it's like don't like learn from the teen version of yourself that would have been like, getting like perms in their hair and going on like all sorts of like weird corrupted SARMs, and like give your body like some time, because it's so straightforward, man. And again, going back to like my experience with like lifting and doing it for decades, I almost feel like it's wealth in the money game. I don't realize I'm doing it half the time. I'm just making good moves. It's such a passive thing. Even when I am prepping, it is something that, okay, look, it took me 20 something years to learn, but that's not how it works. It's like people who come after me are going to learn these things faster and sooner. And eventually, like, I'm going to have a bunch of people like in their late 20s, early 30s, be like, I don't track and I just get shredded. I have good habits, and we've learned to work these things out. So it can become a very passive thing that is much less complicated than like if you go down the TRT route. You just have to have a little patience, and you leverage the fact that as an older person, like you should have more patience. You should understand how mastery works. You should understand that you just can't walk into any world and expect great things to happen. Because at that point, you've probably done a few things, I don't know, like that you're good at career wise, whatever, that it took time to get there. And you expect to like just come here and like be king of the mountain like in 3 years. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to go get TRT. It makes no sense. So just get to work. Like, yes, I bodybuild, but the most important thing this does for me, it's like it's just a form of self-care. Like all these things that like we do without thinking, the stuff that's in our fridge, how we live, to a lot of people feels like a burden, but it's like no, it's like sometimes healthcare, that's how it is. It's doing investing in yourself like over time. So yeah, that's my
Yeah,
spiel, man.
I all of my I'm finishing my PhD and all of my research is in resistance training for over 60s. And like you're trying to sell it to someone, but it's almost like having an insurance policy. It's like, look, you're saying to someone in their early 60s, they've a high quality life, they have decent physical function, and they're not at the point where they're worried about it. And I suppose like where you might have been talking about guys in their mid to late 40s or early 50s. Um, Similarly to that, like I would be dealing with a lot of older people, and you're trying to say to someone, look, you're not there yet, but with a little bit of patience and just sticking with some form of exercise or some kind of resistance training, that it is building up that bank of investment for when you're in your 70s, when you're in your 80s, the when the real degeneration starts.
Mhm.
And I suppose, like you, where you're kind of working with more general population, a lot of the people coaches are going to be working with, particularly if you're a personal trainer in a gym, are probably going to be people in their 40s, 50s, and they probably do feel a little bit of the effects of aging. Maybe they feel they've a family, they've a job, they end up by the end of the week, they do 60, 70 hours. But like you said, there is people are really, really resilient, and building, kind of reinforcing that as coaches is our job a lot of the time, of reminding people they are resilient. And I suppose that kind of Nassim Taleb book of the anti-fragile, but you do really have to take on that mindset at some point. And it's one thing we we always joke about with the older adults. We have them uh, kind of have to remind them that they're not made of glass.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's crazy how resistant the human body is. Like it's like one of
Yeah.
my favorite pre-workouts is like Nature's Metal, like the Instagram page. Like the other day there was
Oh,
a wolf
Jesus
with like
Christ. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
w-
yeah,
with
yeah.
its jaw hanging off, like it might have got kicked off by an elk or something. But like there it is, like surviving. And again, like we are here because you probably somewhere had I don't know, an ancestor that was like mauled by a bear, like nearly to death. They made it through, and then they were able to pass on the genes. And so it's like it's in there. You just have to search for it. And dude, like that's exactly true.
No, I just think it's resistance training as a form of exercise. I do think or exercise in general. I do think there is a kind of an urge in a lot of people that they don't even know they have it. They don't even know that they want something hard. They don't know they want a challenge. They don't know they want something difficult. But as soon as they start, and I think that's why, like similarly to you, I had a very similar experience when I started lifting. I was just like, "What is this?" I was like, "This feels fucking amazing." I like completely changed my life, and you're nearly feel compelled to tell, especially when you're a young fella, because you just feel like you have to tell all your friends and get everyone into it because it's this amazing thing. And a lot of people would share that experience where they just flicked with it. And it could be running, it could be fucking, I don't know, salsa dancing, but something challenging, something that kind of made them think, something that made them push their bodies. People people do intrinsically want that, I think, and well, not all people, but a lot of people, it does really fill some urge or some deep need within us.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, kind of related to that point, like, it is nice if you're somebody who's in their like early 30s, like early 40s or whatever like that. You've probably went through a lot of your life getting to a point of being like a professional in some area, like maybe it's your career, right? Whereas like if you haven't got into resistance training, or all the kind of habits that help improve resistance training results, like now is almost your opportunity to like be a beginner again, right? And it's going to take you a lot longer to become a pro at those things again. So it's giving you another kind of area of, I suppose, fulfillment you could have in life that is going to, again, make it's obviously going to make your quality of life better, right? Because you're going to improve actual kind of physical components of health, but as well, you have something that you're kind of working towards now, right? It's not as if like, oh, I've reached the pinnacle of my life and it's all downhill from here. You can almost see yourself getting like just better with age now, and that's obviously very evident within, like, if you look at like again the highest level of like natural bodybuilders, right? Most, like, a lot of them are getting towards the kind of masses category, and like even older. So it is kind of evident that you can still make substantial progress. Will you make the same amount of progress as like the person who started when they're 20? No, but probably nothing to do with your actual kind of hormonal levels. It's probably just more so to do with that person started earlier, right? Similar component to somebody started saving money earlier. They're probably going to be a little bit richer. But again, it's trying to allowing yourself to have that little bit of something else to work on in life that's like that's not necessarily related to something maybe you're a professional in already.
Yeah, you have that leverage when you're older. Like you've learned a few things, you've been through the process. Actually, the shirt I'm wearing is kind of that's where that goes. It's expert beginner because I absolutely love just going to do something new and just because of like I teach people this stuff and I see people get ahead of themselves like all the time. Like I'm able to stop myself when I'm doing that. It's like, no. It's like going back to kindergarten. It's like, okay, like let's get that letter straight. Okay, then we can like move on to the bigger things. So yeah, you get to leverage that. Like that's where again, it's like with older folks, like leverage the fact that you can make more efficient time out of this because you know yourself better. You know how things work. You should be more patient. In some ways, who knows? Like you might even get results that would have been, we'll never know, very similar to what you would have done had you started earlier, just because you're wiser.
You have
Yeah, 100%.
back and behind you, because this stuff costs money.
Absolutely. Yes, it does.
One question as well I wanted to ask is, what changes have you made to like we've talked about your nutrition, but like what types of changes have you made to your nutrition? Sorry, your training over the last like 5 years or 5 to 10 years that have like been kind of that have had a huge kind of impact on your like physical outcomes.
Yeah. A big one was kind of learning to tell apart what I'm willing to do versus like what I should be doing, right? Because a lot of what still got me here, like a lot of my base was built off like, I don't know, like leg days that were somewhere between 60 to 80 sets in like totality, like front to back, quads, hamstrings, all that, like over the course of a week. So learning that, hey, like to believe it or not, like be more feely, like when it comes to myself, because I think that's something that athletes pride themselves in is like being able to ignore what they're feeling and just like plow through, and that works, but not as well once you get to certain levels. At that point, it's like you have to trust like your body's like its own feedback. So actually, one thing that's helped me immensely with this is like I'm a huge fan of like meditation, and it's one of those things where like you tell adults this and they're like, I suck at it, and I'm like, that's exactly the point, bro. Like you are doing it right. If it's frustrating you and you feel like it does nothing, keep doing it. But it gets like you learn to um have a better understanding for yourself through this sort of mindfulness when it comes to like what's going on up here, what your body's trying to tell you, when you should ignore it, when you should press on. Because being an athlete is a little bit of both, right? Like if I was just eating when I was hungry, like I wouldn't get in shape, right? But when it comes to my training, being more mindful of like what are my adaptive abilities, like what is it that I can actually, how much progress I can expect, how much work that's going to take, and not worry so much about being perfect, because for the most part, like if you listen carefully, like all the signals are there. And this is meant along with just better strategies where I really have been able to identify what are the main movers, what are the things that are really moving the needle over time. It's made it so that it's very cut and dry. But even though you could get a younger version of me and I give them this system, and they wouldn't be able to manage it. They couldn't. So it makes sense on paper, but again, people aren't paper, so you have to. It's a multi-dimensional thing. So yeah, that's been the biggest thing, is just figuring out what works, what doesn't, and learning to trust myself, or at least listen to myself, and take that information and do what I feel is best in a very fast-paced, dynamic way, because sometimes you have to make those decisions like that. So yeah, I'm training 3 days a week. I've been since once my prep ended. A lot of it was just to initially was to prove a point to my athletes that like after, because I played other sports. What do you do after your season? It's like you're chilling. You're not getting back to work the next Monday. Like it's time to start that off season. It's like you've just been through something. If you've done it right, it's like, chill out for a little bit. Let's, heal up so that we can start on that next campaign. So I was like, I'm gonna train 3 days a week, minimal volume, to prove to you guys that like even I'm doing this. But then I'm like, you know what? Let me get another month. Let me get another month, and then eventually, like it's been almost a year, and I'm still here, and I thoroughly enjoy this off season. I train 3 days a week. I have 4 roaming off days. Um, it's gonna, I think, potentially, because there's a little bit less wasted motion from the stress, from the training side of things. I think potentially, should I prep next year, it's going to help me um, go to deeper places than like ever before. So that's my hope, anyways. With an upgraded physique, hopefully I haven't atrophied. We'll see.
There, Alberto, do you think maybe it's a natural getting to where you are is a natural evolution as opposed to like kind of from what I'm getting of you as a kind of a personality type, it's like your interests are what, or your interest in something is what will dictate your motivation and kind of your you can leverage that in whatever way you want. But for you, it's nearly a curiosity thing, and that you kind of coming full circle with this is kind of going. It's nearly that itch or that kind of tick to kind of figure things out.
Yeah, a lot of it's just like asking questions, and you know how it goes. It opens up other things because when you've mastered one thing, you just see the whole world through that lens. So
Mm.
like the whole world is basically bodybuilding to me, and I can see bodybuilding in just about like anything. And like very quickly, I am able to um, I'll include myself, like just me as a person outside of the bodybuilder. Like there's so many things that it has done for me that it's like, let's start to examine yourself in a similar way to your training split. Like what things are serving you, what things are not. How could we get the most out of this thing? So yeah, very holistic, very hippie, if you will, but I wouldn't bodybuild any other way.
No, I love that. Shane, what were you going to say, man?
I was gonna say there's probably a lot of people who are listening who are after losing their minds when they just heard that a pro bodybuilder trains 3 days a week. But like, with, like the more advanced you get, right, the better your training quality becomes. The better,
Mm-hmm.
the more you are extracting from like a rep or your training volume. So like, you can go like decrease your volumes over time. Like I think initially when there was the huge hype around like how many sets to do per muscle group and the maximum sets that you can do to progress. A lot of people just had the idea that you just have to over time just have that volume continue to grow without the kind of understanding that not all of those reps, not all those sets are going to be created equal. And like that's definitely one thing I've noticed in my training, like over the last few years. Like my volume hasn't really increased much, but like what I'm getting from sets is substantially different. Like what I used to be able to have to do in 4 sets, I can do in 2 sets now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we know that you can maintain your muscle mass of like apologies of like 1/9 of like the volume that you can progress on, right? So even if you are at that as well, you have to put it in perspective in regards to like where you are with your career, right? If you were to go up to like your MRV or your maximal recoverable volume, how much would you get from that realistically after 2-3 decades of training, right? Compared to somebody who's in their first 3 to 5 years of training, right? So it's all about kind of putting it in perspective and understanding that you can kind of change these things as you like progress in your training career and not necessarily being too afraid to do so. Like I at one point did train like 6 days a week and it was like religious, and if I missed a day I was like freaking out over it. And I think I followed Greg Knuckles had like a 3 day strength training program, and I was like, I can't go from doing 6 days of training all the way down to 3. And I did it and I got stronger and I didn't lose any muscle mass, and as a result then from there I pretty much never went above like doing 5 days a week. Even now I only do 5 just because I want to go to the gym another time.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's my first I guess spurt when it comes to like moving in this direction. Actually, I was trying to squat 500 pounds. I hadn't squatted 500 pounds since I think I was like 21 or something. So I had this terrible on my back. Oh, I'm good, right? This terrible injury where it just took me years to not just physically but mentally get over it. But prior to that, like the squat was one of my lifts, and I'm like, I want to squat 500 pounds, but I don't like how much time it takes up. So I'm like, I'm gonna try to do it in 2 to 3 weekly sets a week, and that's exactly what I did. And had it not been for the lockdown, I think I would have been able to carry that thing up like pretty close to like 600. Like it blew my mind that it confirmed the notion that most situations you don't need more things, and this is a global thing. Like you don't need to buy more stuff, you don't need more of that, you don't need more of this. It's just you need more of you to be there and present is what it is. So when I was squatting once a week, I was paying attention to all my warm-ups. Like they weren't just warm-ups, every load mattered. It had a purpose. And like now with my training, like with my bodybuilding training, it's like you said, like I know what works like when it comes to the exercise selection. I've gotten stronger over the years, so much in fact that like I don't want to show how strong I am. Like I find ways to make myself like weaker because I'm like, that's just more warm-ups. And like if something goes wrong, it's worse with bigger weight, right? So, and just like being there and like extra attentive to what it is that like you're doing. Like you do these three things like outside of like the other metrics that we talk about when it comes to like lifting. Like that's again like Shane said, it's like with 2 sets he could produce more volume in a way than what he could do with 4 just a few years back. I mean, we've all been there. We've taken someone through a training session that's like they've done something that's similar to that, and you take them through it, and it's like, oh wow, like that was very different, and it was much less work. So, but that's a skill, man. That takes time. Like I wouldn't give anyone who's like, again in that phase where it's like, okay, they got new joints, they're not super strong yet. That guy, I'm gonna like, it's like, well, let's try a lot of stuff and we'll see what sticks, what likes what you like. You get more practice, but eventually as time goes on, yeah, you want to figure out what's moving, what isn't. I will say this, I think when it comes to joint issues, because that's usually what bottlenecks people, that's what stops you from progressing. A lot of people attribute it to load, but I think if your load increments are responsible and good, most of the time it's more of a volume thing. Like most of the bench pressers I know, it's like, okay, they know how much practice they need to bench press, but the bottleneck is like, can my joints hold up like with all that practice? Like they fear that more than like the absolute loads on the bars. So it's in your best interest, especially as you get older, to condense that volume because again, what gets you is like it's kind of like what happens with endurance athletes. It's not necessarily that like it's like super impactful in their cutting. It's more so that it's just like it's constant pounding over time. And the issue with this is that what a lot of older lifters end up doing actually is like, well, I can't lift heavy without hurting myself. Number of reasons as to why they do that. Like quite often, it's like their interpretation of the lift, and they're still not sensible regressions. But their solution usually is like, let me add like more volume and higher reps, which usually tend to be like less mindful all over the place, and they end up just kind of shrinking themselves into a corner over time. So. But yeah, Shane, like you, like, dude, I can do in 1 set, like what I was able to do like 5 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, I think I was going to be like, I think I was going to be earphones in Lawrence.
Yeah, I had to take them out. The battery was dying on them.
You realize as you get more advanced in regards to like the load limiting variations, as you mentioned there, like I was seeing you do like the hack squat and stuff like that, and relative to how like strong you are, how big your muscles are, like you don't use that much load, right? And it's definitely something that, again, when I'm training in the gym, there's certain exercises I won't do because I don't want to do as many warm-ups. I don't want to load them up as much. Like I don't want to do a leg press because I have no desire to like load up however many plates I need. Like I much prefer to do like a single leg or do something like a pendulum where I don't have to use much load, but I can get the same kind of training effect, right? Definitely when you're earlier on in your training career, like you have such amount of ego, right? Because there's I want to show everybody how big and strong I am, and then over time it's the case of like that just starts to dissolve. Like, and it's not a case that when I was younger I would have said I would do it differently. Like that's how I wanted to train at that time. Like I wanted to train more extra. You wanted to show off, and that's completely fine. I think a lot of guys can probably relate to that. But then over time, as you get more into it, and you're kind of what matters to you more, like starts to change, and what your kind of focus starts to shift towards. Like if your shift starts to go towards your actual progress as opposed to what it looks like your progress is like, then that's when you can actually start to make even better progress, because you're focusing on the right things as opposed to maybe external praise that you're looking for from other people.
Yeah, that reminds me of everyone's high school dilemma, where it's you did things that were you didn't even care about them. You'd wear this, you'd wear that, just to kind of impress others and fit in. And you look back and you're like, man, if I could do my teen years with my adult brain, I'd be a freaking rock star. So it's kind of the same thing in the weight room, you kind of want to belong, and sometimes you go outside of your actual strength range for the sake of feeling like you're doing something yourself. And I remember my first day in an actual commercial gym, I was self-conscious to curl. So I've never curled in front of people. And even though I had a little head start at home. So I get it, but as you get older, you're like right now, that side back hack squat, I'm 4 plates, my knees being trashed forward, not my whole foot is on there. And I see all these dudes in the UK hitting 5-6, and I'm like, ooh. If I put my heels down and bring my feet up, I'll show them something. But I'm like, no, stick to your mission, Bert. That's let them dog that one out. So yeah, it just again, especially in my case, if I'm gonna get strong, it needs to be something that respects the barbell arts. So at some point, I don't know, I'll probably get bored and run a deadlift only cycle, because I'm decent at the deck, considering them put together more like an Asian lifter. Long torso, short little arms. But yeah, something like that. I don't care what I side back hack squat, even though the internet might. That's still tempting sometimes.
I think, Alberto, you gave an extremely insightful hour and a half, nearly there, of your time. I think it's brilliant just for anyone starting off on their journey. That is kind of literally that, to listen to you, that you've done everything. You've done a ketogenic diet, you've spent years tracking everything, you've spent years not tracking. You've done 50 sets per muscle group in a session. You've also are now training 3 days a week, and you might do 9 sets a week. And I think hearing that from someone as seasoned as you, and someone that's kind of been in the game for as long as you, I hope people listen to it and they're willing to come away from this and maybe dip their toes into lots of different ponds, and try things, and go through that trial of fire, and see what works for them, and hopefully they'll come full circle like you did.
I was just waiting just in case Shane wanted to say something. No, thank you guys. I need to keep, because you know how it goes. We all had those old boomer interrupters when we started lifting that would try to tell us how it is, and it's bro, you ain't got no receipts. So I got to keep doing my thing, because if I have the receipts, these kids will listen, and hopefully that way they don't go through as much trouble as I did, and they surpass what I do, and eventually they move on to bigger, more nuances that would blow our minds, if we could look 20 years into the future. So yeah, that's the goal. So I'll keep doing my thing. I try to fight off father time as long as I can, and try to preach what I know while doing that.
There's plenty more years of progress ahead, I'm sure. I'd echo all of Lawrence's thoughts there. It as I kind of put up on my story the other day, I shared a picture one of your vlogs, and like having access to like podcasts like this, having access to like YouTube, and kind of seeing how, you know, people who are at the top of a very niche sport, like either powerlifting or bodybuilding, and getting an insight as to how like the top people do it is obviously super insightful. It's very helpful. I do think, like, you know, from like following yourself and like the other 3D guys, like over the years, it's for me, it's actually been very refreshing from the kind of typical bodybuilding content that you might find that like typically has a lot more kind of like black and white, like you have to do this, you can't do that. And like I do think even in more of the like the untested crowd, like there is way more kind of shades of grey coming in now. The likes of like John Jewett putting out some really good information in that kind of regard. But to be able to kind of see exactly how you can bodybuild, it doesn't have to be just like one way. It doesn't have to be, you know, monster factory clothing, lumberjack clothes, and like doing like Dorian Yates hit style. You can do it in a variety of ways and still make progress, and do that for decades is like super important. Because do you want to do bodybuilding, or do you want to lift weights for like, you know, 5 years, 10 years, or do you want to do it until you can't anymore? You know, I think that's ultimately bodybuilding is kind of giving a lot of people that kind of like vehicle to lift until they are like in their 50s, in their 60s. So yeah, thank you very much for, you know, all the work that you and the lads are doing.
No, thank you guys. Appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Right. So
Cool.
thank you very much,
Cool.
for coming on. If you did like the podcast at home, make sure to follow Alberto on his social media, on the Team 3DMJ YouTube as well. I'll leave their information in the bio as well. If you did enjoy the podcast, make sure to like it, make sure to rate it, leave a review, and share on your story, because it helps the podcast grow. And yeah, that's pretty much all for this week, and we will catch you in the next one.